You are listening to Methods Build What's Next Digital Product Perspectives, presented by Global Logic. At Method, we aim to bridge the gap between technology and humanity for a more seamless digital future. Join us as we uncover insights, best practices, and cutting-edge technologies with top industry leaders that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences.
If you missed part one, please go back and find our part one episode. Very, very glad you're continuing with us for part two.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone.
So in part one, you were talking about the shifting landscape of utilities and the different things that they are having to manage.
I can barely remember, but yes, that is what we did.
It's a very long time ago. And one of the things that I find really interesting is when you talk about the different assets like the EVs and all of those things and the different players and how utility customers are behaving differently and utilities are asking different things of their customers. It's becoming more of a partnership with their customers. I find that shifting relationship between utilities and their customers is having some other downstream implications. So I feel like it's changing the mental model of what a utility's function is and ought to be. I think it's also requiring utilities to think about their customers differently. In a lot of spaces, they were people who lived in their service territory who paid the agreed upon rate, the end. But now that there's a different kind of partnership that is required there, but I find it's also having an interesting effect on the inside data management layer of utilities, because it used to be very, very clear cut, right? You had like the people who managed the grid, and you had the infrastructure data and the asset data that they owned. And then you had the customer side of the house, and they were responsible for marketing and billing, and you had the data that they own. But as this relationship shifts between utilities and their customers, I'm finding it's more difficult to draw clean distinctions between what is infrastructure data and what is customer data. Because when I think about, as a customer, if I have a Generac at my house, or I have an EV at my house and there's a battery at my house to charge it, and I say, yeah, sure, I will give you an opportunity to kind of take some of my stored up Generac battery or my EV battery. If there's a crisis or a storm a couple towns away, sure thing, use my power, give it to them. Is that customer data about my asset? Because that's my asset, but now it's also a utility asset. So is that, like, I find that dynamic really interesting, and I'm wondering if you, with all the utility players that you work with, and you don't have to like out anybody by name, but do you find that anyone is managing that shift in paradigm around utility data management particularly well?
I was wondering where this was going to go. Can I hold the question? Let me give you a couple of use cases, and then we'll come back to the question. So I mentioned I was originally in California. I had solar on my roof. In California, like many states, you have this sort of net metering agreement where I really wasn't selling the electricity back into the grid, but I could generate enough that it would drive down my net consumption to zero, right? But the problem I had was that the solar power and the inverter that connected the solar to the grid was actually provided by a third party to me. And they would sort of tell me how much I was consuming. Meanwhile, PG&E would give me insight into how much I owed. And it was down to me to work out whether, in fact, I was going to get anywhere near zero or not, right? And so, there's one problem. And, that is multiplied many, many times, where as the person who ultimately had the data, it was, in fact, my data, about my own generation, I'd have freely shared that with the utility had they been able to guide me on whether I was getting to zero or not. So in truth, it's often not about the data and who owns it. It's about the value you derive from the data that drives people's willingness. The other one, by the way, that we saw in California a lot is electric vehicles. So You mentioned distribution transformers before, the little things at the top of boxes in the neighborhood, top of poles in the neighborhood. I think I remember, I could be wrong here, but I think it was 3 electric vehicles in one cul-de-sac was enough to pop that transformer, right? And the problem with electric vehicles a decade or so ago is it was a certain demographic that was buying them, and they all tended to live in Berkeley, right? So in Berkeley, PG&E had a huge issue with people bringing EVs in, with them not being able to plan for that challenge. So there's another area where if we could just learn to share the data, if the car company sold the information or shared, let's not use sold, let's use shared the information, right, with PG&E, they'd have been far more prepared to avoid outages based on where cars were coming. So this goes back to that whole ecosystem conversation. I actually now can't remember your question because I'm an old guy, but it was is anyone doing it better or well?
Like, because I think about, like, as inside of utilities, right? And they're trying to get these AI models together. AI models require the data, and you have to move data efficiently from one place to another, so you're not recreating the same, storing the same data 4 times.
So it's a data sharing question.
And it's like, how do you take what, now that the relationships are changing, the expectations are changing, personalized expectations of their customers, like, you already have this information, why are you asking me about this now? Storm restoration stuff. I just find that, like, that infrastructure data, customer data are becoming so overlapped.
They
are. How do you know of anybody who's handling that well?
Everyone is dealing with it as a problem statement. I think we're all still coming to terms with data sharing and its many challenges, right? In Europe, there is an act being, it's actually enforced now, called the European Data Act. And the purpose of the European Data Act is actually data democratization, right? It's not yet enforceable. We're not clear in terms of what it is that's going to happen, but it's all about access to and sharing of data because of that ecosystem problem that I described in the last episode 3 weeks ago. But so that ecosystem problem where we've got so many players now who are playing in the market, offering up energy, consuming energy in different ways at different times, we need to be able to share that information. Not to mention, by the way, our own, as customers, our own expectations are evolving in terms of how we want to interact, how much information we get, when we receive, and how we receive that information. So generally speaking, vendors like Hitachi Energy, we consider all of the data that comes through and from our customers as our customers' data. And there's often a debate about monetizing the data. It's not at all about monetizing the data. It's about what value can you derive from that data, and then maybe there's a question of how that gets monetized. So the European Data Act is about solving that problem, right? If I want to, I should be able to, for a fair price, have access to any data in a secure and sanitized way, right? And so that's really what the European Data Act is doing. If you're in an enterprise and you're not paying attention to the European Data Act, you should be, even though we're not actually in Europe. A lot of those regulations do have far-reaching implications, and very often other countries will follow. And we already see in Australia and Germany, and to some extent here in the US, we already see nationalized boundaries being put in place around what data can be moved where and how. So this whole data space and the sharing of data is really a vital one to solve for us to be able to get to where we need to get to in terms of a sustainable future.
For sure.
How was that for answering the question without actually answering the question? That's very good. Edit that bit out.
Yeah, diplomatically non-committal is the politician's answer, but it's fine. That's fine. I'll let you off the hook. Speaking of, like, utilities, and I was recently part of a small team. We did a workshop about AI for a bunch of utility executives. And there was so many different directions that we could have taken that workshop in. And so we did like a little pre-session survey to figure out what their expectations were coming in, tailor the content, that sort of thing. When we got the results back, some of them were not surprising, right? So it was not surprising that utility executives said that their top priorities business-wise for wanting AI was managing the increasing grid complexity and operational efficiencies, right? So no surprise there. But one of the things that I did find striking in their responses was that unanimously, they said that something that was really important to them that they wanted to talk about and plan for was how to prepare their organizations for an AI kind of a world. And so as somebody that has spent a considerable amount of my career in change management, I find that refreshingly rare that at this point for technologies that they are just beginning to really kind of flirt with and think about, that they're already considering the people side of that. I'm also have been in the change management arena long enough that I'm still skeptical that it will like turn into some big pattern of like utilities everywhere are investing real budgets and lots of expertise into managing the people readiness side of that super well. I hope, and I did leave that room hopeful and optimistic about like this cohort of leadership that seems to be rising in the ranks at utilities, bringing those types of perspectives to the table. So my question to you is, you talk to lots more utilities probably than I do. As you are looking at the state of utilities today, it could be their leadership, where they invest their time and money, their how or what kinds of talent they're cultivating, how they're approaching their digital strategies. What kinds of moves, operational, organizational, do you wish more utilities were making today to prepare for that AI-enabled world? Like, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's a very good question. So I was actually just about to leap in and defend my customers, and now I've got to tell them what to do.
I'm not saying they're doing a bad job.
A couple of things I would say. I think sometimes utilities get a little bit of a bad rap, right? They are considered to be a little conservative, but they are managing one of the most vital
I don't
critical
mind that.
infrastructures that we have. And they also have been very forward thinking in terms of things like IoT. There's a term that they use called smart metering. I think all of you probably now have some kind of digital meter on your home, which gives them more insight into what you're consuming, gives you more insight into what you're consuming. We're not getting some random number thrown at us on a quarterly basis now. That's all IoT, right? And utilities were way ahead of many markets in terms of what they're doing there. All of them are looking, all enterprises today are looking to be more agile, right? The merging of those value streams I talked about in the last episode. But so the merging of the many data value streams it's all about enterprise agility and being able to predict and project and evolve as the world evolves around us. So I think everyone's driving that level of adoption. I think where all of us are struggling, and I will put our own corporation in there as well, is that today what we're finding is that the data is probably the most important precursor to the technology. And we've never historically thought about the data as a holistic asset. We certainly have thought about it strategically in the context of a process or an organization, but never as an enterprise. And if you're merging these value streams, you need to be able to take data that was historically captured over here in one format, maybe a spreadsheet from visual inspection, and perhaps video analytics over there as I flew a drone over something. You've got to be able to merge that sort of multimodal data. The great news is that technology is now enabling that at a rate that is frankly making even my hair curl, right? And hopefully we can get to that because there's some really exciting stuff going on there. But it's understanding, how do I get the data in a state that I can use the data effectively and as an agile corporation, I think is the piece we need to do more of. And that means everything from data literacy of your employees, who aren't necessarily all digitally native people, right? Who've all gone about their task in the best way they know possible, but may not have thought about the accuracy of the information they're capturing and how they're capturing it as the key outcome, right? So data literacy all the way through process automation and how I can merge the data sets, I think is an area that we really need to pay a lot more attention
I
to.
could give you like poetry snaps for the data literacy. I agree. But like, I want the people who are running nuclear plants to be risk averse. Like, I like that quality in them. I feel like they are not, like, utilities are not going to be the game changer ground, like developing the R&D.
Financial services
stuff.
and so on are going to move
right,
faster.
like that's, for the most part, they're going to be recipients of, adopters of those big, huge, like they're not going to spend billions of dollars to develop a chip.
Way. In fact,
and that's fine.
Many years ago, many years ago, and I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but someone from Duke who's here in the room will probably remember, big, tall CEO of Duke Energy. When I was at Cisco, we came in to talk to them about how digital was going to save the world. And we rode in on our white horse and he said, listen here, son, pioneers die on the trail. I don't want to be the pioneer. I want you to get me to version 2 and 3 as quickly and effectively as possible. And I think that's an appropriate approach, right?
Yeah, I mean, their core functions, how they make money, that would make a great episode 3, by the way, of how utilities make money. It's wild, blows my mind. But all of that, they're not really like set up for that kind of thing. But I do think they have a critical seat at that R&D table, and the partnerships. The faster the world moves, the faster, because they really are, a lot of those big planetary problems are knocking at their doorstep. And they are truly, like I said, rising to the occasion in a really, I find it a very hopeful kind of way, that the innovators who exist in utilities are there. Like I
would agree. I think
them.
we'd argue they are some of the most important problems that they're trying to solve for society. So
Absolutely. So as we're thinking about the big sort of groundbreaking technologies, either being driven within the energy industry or from outside of it, that you think could have, game-changing kinds of impacts for utilities and the work that they're doing, what kind of ambitious ideas inspire you for this space?
Well, we sort of touched a little bit on how AI can help across those 3 areas, right? In the running of the grid. By the way, that software layer that is the running of the grid means the grid is an inherently digital thing and has been since the year dot, right? So we need to think of the grid as an inherently digital business rather than think of it as being laggard, right? But so at that layer, because of the dynamism, but because of the massive scale and complexity, it's historically been very, very hard to drive levels of automation. And bear in mind, I'm saying automation, not autonomy, right? I think in many areas we are on a journey towards autonomy, but there are many areas where we will always have a human in the loop. But the improvement in the speed at which we can compute and the improvement in AI and AI modeling is absolutely going to fundamentally change over time how we manage the grid.
You're bullish on the quantum chip.
I mean, we have our colleagues in Hitachi Rail working with our Hitachi Digital organizations just announced, I can't remember what it's called, HIMAX, I think. They just announced video inspection of the catenary on trains, working with NVIDIA. But fundamentally, what's important to me is the use case itself is not a new one. A lot of people are looking at video analytics of various things, transmission lines, for example, and are able to use AI to identify what might possibly be a failure. But that often involves shipping stuff out to record and then bringing the data back centrally and then analyzing it and munging it and a couple of days later making a decision. What really fundamentally shifted is they were able to use GPUs from NVIDIA to do the same use case using the same models, but at the edge on the train or on the platform in minutes rather than in days. And so that is a fundamental game changer in terms of how you deal with the information that you have and how you adjust your process to leverage that speed. If you look at the next layer down, I talked about us using models we have an offering we call Lumada APM, which uses models to identify and predict the failure of these big assets, right? And it's difficult to do. We don't have a lot of failure data. It's generally very reliable. So being able to prioritize where I do my activity, being able to remotely identify when I have something to do rather than get in a truck and drive has a significant impact in how I optimize my staff. Not in reducing the number of staff I have, but using the skills of the staff I have more effectively. And if you look at generative AI, it's the first time I've said that, right? If you look at generative AI and what GenAI is doing today, we just did a pilot inside our company. I think I can probably share this. We just looked at the easy one, which is the adoption of embedded AI inside the tools we already use to collaborate, right? And we use Microsoft, so that's 365 Copilot. And we looked at, show of hands quickly, right? Who uses Copilot, 365 Copilot? Not enough of you. Leave here, go learn it. Who uses ChatGPT? Okay, that's better. But so if you look at your general knowledge worker, right? Folks like me, we are seeing almost a day's worth of productivity, 7 to 8 hours of productivity a month through the leveraging of Copilot, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you multiply that by 40,000 employees, right, and there is an incredible return in just helping us be more effective in the basic stuff and the repetitive tasks that all of us have to struggle through every single day, right? And you go into a meeting and someone has to take minutes of meeting, especially if it's a critical environment, right? Now GenAI is taking accurately the minutes of meeting and identifying which individual in the room who doesn't have to be logged in, but through their voice, which individual in the room has taken that action and when they have to respond with that action, right? So the level of efficiency in our day-to-day lives, again, we're not taking jobs away, we're helping people use their skills vastly more effectively. Our company is growing incredibly fast as a consequence of this exciting environment. We talked about where the grid is changing and there's lots of growth, but that means we can't hire people fast enough. We need to make our people more effective in what they do, right? And then if I add to that, a lot of what we do every day is not actually knowledge worker stuff. It's highly complex. We have expertise and we have to apply that expertise. Now that expertise is somewhat unique to us, right? But there has to be a way that we can avoid doing the same job, leveraging that expertise multiple times. For us to respond to a customer request, an RFQ, a response for bid, right? We will get on a napkin or in a spreadsheet or in a CAD drawing or in a line diagram, a whole bunch of specifications that we have to take an expert and have them understand what it is our customers need and then engineer what our customers want, right? We can help them now understand using multimodal generative AI, regardless of what source the data comes in, we can now get the right specifications in front of that engineering resource vastly more effectively. And then the engineer is doing what they are best at, engineering, not repeating, deriving, trying, right? So I think there's massive, massive opportunity in modern ways of doing those things we simply have to do. And generative AI, I think, is really going to be a game changer. I know there's a lot of hype around, but in the right space, with the right focus, with the right ethical approach, generative AI is fundamentally a game changer. And then the last one I'll say, because I could talk for hours about this without any real knowledge, by the way. I'm just kidding. But the other one that's really, really exciting is the agentic aspect of that, right? Having an agent take all the smart stuff and make it simple for me, who's generally an idiot, to be able to use it, right? Today, what happens is I have to take my data and I have to manipulate my data in such a way that the question I ask of the model is going to get me the answer I expect. And in many cases, I don't want my data because that data is critical data or proprietary data. I don't want it in a public ChatGPT LLM, right? I want to be able to, and so all of my effort is going into protecting that data and getting an accurate answer. All of that is being automated. And so all the time and effort being spent there goes away, and you use an agent to help you get the answer you need in the time that you need it, with accurate and effective answers. That is a fundamental game changer.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.